Hi, boys and girls, and welcome to another episode of Greek Myth Mania with Miss Kathy from Shaler, North Hills Public Library. So this week we are featuring clever and vain kings that think a little bit too highly of themselves. So let's see who we're going to start with. We are on page 123 of our Delaire's Greek Myths book. If you are reading along online with us, and I did put the site for the Delaire's books there, if you would care to read along. When Perseus gave Athena the Gorgon's head, she put it on her breastplate, and it made her still more powerful. She also fetched 2 of Medusa's bones, and from them she made herself a double flute. She could not understand why Hera and Aphrodite burst out laughing every time she played on it, for she was very pleased with the music she made. But one day she saw her own image in her polished shield. With puckered lips and puffed cheeks, she did not look at all like her stately self. In disgust, she threw the flute down to earth and put a curse on it. Masias, a satyr who was capering about in the Phrygian woods, found the flute and began to play on it. When he discovered he could play 2 melodies at the same time, he was wild with joy. He hopped through the woods, playing on his double flute, boasting that now he could make better music than Apollo himself, who is the god of music, if you remember. Apollo frowned when he heard that a satyr dared to compare himself to him, the god of music, and he stormed down from Olympus to the Phrygian woods. He found Marsyas, who was so delighted with his own music that he even challenged Apollo to a contest. "You shall have your contest," said Apollo, "but if I win, you shall lose your hide." The 9 muses, of course, were to be the judges, and Marsyas insisted that King Midas of Phrygia also be a judge. The 9 muses are the arts, so drama and poetry and such, so they would be good judge of music. King Midas was a kind but rather stupid man, I'll show you the pictures a little more in a minute, who had always been a friend to the Phrygian satyrs. One morning his servants had found an old satyr sleeping in the king's favorite flower bed. Midas had spared the satyr from punishment and let him go. This old satyr was a follower of Dionysus, and the god had rewarded Midas for his kindness by granting him a wish. Short-sightedly, King Midas wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. His golden touch made him the richest man on earth, but he almost starved to death, for even his food and drink turned to gold. And when his little daughter ran to him to hug him, she too turned into gold. Midas had to beg Dionysus to undo his wish and make everything as it had been before. Now again, King Midas showed poor judgment. The 9 muses all agreed that Apollo was by far the better musician, but Midas voted for the Phrygian satyr. Apollo disdainfully turned his lyre upside down and played just as well as before. He ordered Marsyas to turn his flute and do the same. Not a sound came from Marsyas's flute, however hard he blew, and even Midas had to admit that the satyr's flute was inferior to Apollo's lyre. So Marsyas lost the contest, and Apollo pulled off his skin and made a drum of it. Then he turned to King Midas and said, "Ears as stupid as yours belong to a donkey. Donkey's ears you shall have from now on." Ever after, King Midas went about with a tall, peaked cap on his head to hide his long ears. His subjects thought he had started a new fashion, and it wasn't long before all the Phrygians wore tall, peaked caps. The king's barber was the only one who knew what Midas was hiding. He had been forbidden to breathe a word about it, and he almost burst from having to keep such an important secret. When he could bear it no longer, he ran out to a lonesome field, dug a hole in the ground, and whispered into it, "King Midas has donkey ears." He quickly covered up the hole and thought the secret was safe. But the nearby reeds had heard it as they swayed in the wind, and they whispered, "Midas has donkey ears, Midas has donkey ears." And soon the secret spread all over the world. King Midas was so ashamed that he left his throne and hid deep in the woods where no one could see him. Okay, so that was the story of Midas. Then we have the story of Sisyphus of Corinth. We're going to just read this one here. Was the cleverest king who ever lived. He was so cunning that he even fooled the gods. One day Sisyphus saw the river god Asopus, who was looking for his daughter Aegina. Sisyphus, who noticed everything that was happening in his kingdom, went after him and said, "I'll tell you what has become of your daughter if you'll give my city a spring." For the only thing his great city lacked was a good supply of fresh water. Asopus hated to part with any of his water. He twisted and squirmed, but at last he struck the ground, and a crystal-clear spring bubbled forth. "It is Zeus himself who has carried off your daughter," said Sisyphus. "I saw him hurry by her," and he pointed out to Asopus the way Zeus had taken. The river god rushed off in a fury and soon caught up with the elopers. Zeus, taken by surprise, had no thunderbolt at hand, so to save himself and the nymph from the river god's rage, he changed himself into a rock and her into the island Aegina. Sisyphus had his spring of water, but Asopus lost his daughter, and Zeus was furious with Sisyphus for meddling in his affairs. He asked Hades to take him to the underworld and punish him severely. Hades was glad to do his brother Zeus a favor and went himself to fetch Sisyphus. When the sly king saw the Lord of the Dead in person, he pretended to be very honored. But why, he asked, had not Hermes, whose office it was to guide dead souls to the underworld, come for him? While Hades searched for a suitable answer, Sisyphus deftly wound a chain around him, and there stood the Lord of the Dead, chained to a post like a dog. As long as Sisyphus kept Hades tied up, nobody could die. The fates got the threads of life tangled, and the whole world was in confusion. Finally, the gods threatened to make life so miserable that for him that he would wish he were dead, and Sisyphus then had to let Hades go. Again, people could die and life could go on normally. The very first soul to be claimed was, of course, that of Sisyphus himself. This time Hermes came for him. The wily king, who had expected this, had told his loving wife not to give him a funeral feast, and not to put a coin under his tongue. So he arrived in the realm of the dead as a poor beggar. Hades was shocked. After all, Sisyphus was a king and entitled to a funeral feast and a golden coin under his tongue to pay for his passage across the Styx, the river into the dead. His wife had to be punished, or she might set a bad example for others. He sent Sisyphus back to earth and told him to teach his wife to respect. "Fooled him again," said Sisyphus when he rejoined his devoted wife. They lived happily for many long years, till at last he died of old age and went to Hades for good. There he was given a task that kept him too busy to think up new tricks. He had to push a boulder up a steep hill, but every time he reached the top of the hill, the boulder slipped from his hands and rolled all the way to the bottom again. And he was sentenced to do that day after day in Hades. So He was not too happy about that. Okay. Then we have one about Bellerophon and Pegasus. Bellerophon, a grandson of Sisyphus, was a great tamer of horses. He would have given all he owned for a ride on the winged horse Pegasus, who had sprung out of Medusa's neck. Pegasus had flown to Greece, where the 9 muses had found him and tended him. They were the only ones who could come close enough to touch him, for Pegasus was wild and swift. One night Bellerophon fell asleep in Athena's temple. He dreamed that the goddess gave him a golden bridle that would make the flying horse tame. And when he awoke, he really had a golden bridle in his hand. Not long thereafter, Pegasus flew over Corinth, saw the clear spring that Sisyphus had won from the river god, and stopped to drink. Carefully, Bellerophon tiptoed up to the winged horse and flung the bridle over his head. The horse neighed, looked at Bellerophon, and suddenly he was so tame that Bellerophon could mount him. Never had there been such a horse and such a horseman. They galloped through the air, over land and over sea, faster than the wind. On the back of his flying horse, Bellerophon set off to fight the Chimera, a fire-breathing beast that was ravaging the kingdom of Lycia in Asia Minor. The Chimera was more fearful than a nightmare. She was lion in front, serpent in back, and goat in between. She spat fire from all her 3 heads, and her hide was so tough that no weapon could pierce it. Swooping down as close as he dared without singeing the coat of his flying horse, Bellerophon went at the monster with a lump of lead stuck to the end of his spear. The Chimera hissed like a serpent, bleated like a goat, and as she opened wide her lion's jaws to roar, he thrust the lump of lead down her throat. Her flaming breath melted the lead, and it trickled into her stomach and killed her. The people of Lycia, who had been hiding in fear behind bolted doors, now dared to come out, and the king of the country was so thankful that he gave Bellerophon the hand of his daughter. When the old king died, Bellerophon inherited the kingdom. He became a great king, loved by his people, feared by his neighbors, and all the monsters lurking nearby. But his fame went to his head, thought too highly of himself, and he grew so vain that he thought he was as great as the gods. He even held himself equal to Zeus. He soared ever higher on his flying horse, and at last he tried to enter Olympus itself. There pride took a spill. Pegasus threw him, and Bellerophon fell to earth, landing in thistle thorns in a distant country. Torn and lame, he wandered about as an unknown beggar until he died. Pegasus entered Olympus alone, and Zeus made the handsome winged horse the carrier of his thunderbolts. So, those were the stories that we have for today about 3 different kings. King Midas, who did not make a good choice when given a choice and wished for everything he touched to turn to gold. And then he didn't make a good choice in the music contest and said Apollo wasn't as good as a mortal. So 2 things about King Midas. And then we had Sisyphus, who was the king who outwitted death twice. But then when he did die, oh boy, he had a tough job of it, what his job was in Hades. And Bellerophon, who was a grandson of that very smart king, who was a great tamer of horses. And there we have the picture of him riding on Pegasus. So, 3 gods that we are, or kings, not gods, that we covered today. And let me see if there was anything else in here. No, not in this one. So let's take a look at this. This one here does not have any of these stories in today, I don't think. We did not have. There is a little bit on Bellerophon in here, 94 to 95. Let's see what it says about them. Poseidon's son, it says in here. His best friend was Pegasus, a flying horse. See, this is where things get a little mixed up. Someone says in our Greek myth book he's Sisyphus' grandson, and here it says he's Poseidon's son. But it does say he slayed the fire-breathing chimera. Beastly battle with the chimera. Together they flew to the chimera's lair, and we did the thing with the lead. A stinging blow, and that's when he got tossed from Pegasus. Planetary motion. Look up at the night sky, and you just may see a strange, sparkling object that looks a lot like a wobbling star. Nicknamed Bellerophon, this quick-moving gas giant, it's 150 times more massive than Earth, is the first planet outside our solar system to orbit a sun-like star. Life on Bellerophon is anything but sunny, though. Liquid iron falls like rain. Liquid iron. And temperatures top 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. We think it's hot here if it gets to 100. Sounds like a perfect fit for a powerful hero. Okay, so that is the planet Bellerophon and the king Bellerophon. And they are not in this book. I do not believe Bellerophon is in this other one. And Midas was not in here. This is more the gods. And Sisyphus was not a god either. So, let's go to our packet and the things that we have listed here. You can watch a short video for kids about King Midas at the second site. The third site has the story of King Midas, but at the bottom there were a lot of other good links you could go to with Greek mythology. And there is included in this packet, and you can print it out, King Midas and the Golden Touch, a short little play you can put on. If you have family members, may not have enough people to each be a different part, so maybe some people get to be 2 parts. Or with your friends, if you're allowed to be getting together with friends. It says there are 9 parts in the play. And it's not too long. You can read the story of King Midas and then test how much you learned from it by answering the questions at the end. And then there are some worksheets to do about King Midas after we get through the play. This is the story to read and some questions on 2 different sheets. Multiple choice. And I did include the answers, but don't check them first. And then there are some various fun worksheets for a little bit, depending on how old you are, kids, to fill in the blanks. And make sentences, circling adjectives, all kinds of different activities there. Another fill in the blank one. Okay, that was it for Midas. Then we have a video you can watch about Sisyphus and Bellerophon, 2 different sites. Print out a coloring page for Pegasus, the winged horse. So, of course, you can make beautiful pictures of Pegasus. Some pictures show her as being a unicorn, but she really wasn't. She was just a winged horse. And you can do a tricky word search. It's a little bit longer, or a little bit bigger one. Lots of names in there, though. We do have Bellerophon, and we have other people that we have read. There's the chimera he was killing, and the Pegasus. We have Odysseus that we read about, the Gorgon. We read about him, one of our heroes, slaying the Gorgon Medusa. Theseus was the Minotaur. Hades, the god. So there's a bunch of different ones that we've covered in there. Most of them you should recognize if you've been watching the Greek myths the whole time. And then you come to the craft part, and that was making a cardboard Pegasus with moving legs. So let me show you what mine ended up looking like. This is mine. And the legs do move, as you can see. I did things a little bit differently, though, than she suggested. The directions on the site. So I did not use cardboard. I used cardstock, which is a little bit heavier paper, because I thought the cardboard was going to be kind of difficult to cut through. If you do use cardboard, you probably have to have an adult cut it for you. But you can do whichever you prefer. And then I had different colored cardstock, so I didn't have to paint all of mine. I put some dappled white paint on there. But other than that, I didn't want to paint it. I just left it brown. It depends what colors you have and what color you want it to be. Maybe you want to paint it pink and purple, more of a magical winged horse type thing. And that would be fine too. She used buttons for making the legs move. You could also, if you don't want to go to that, it was a little bit tricky threading the buttons through all three, well, both legs, front and back, and the body. But if you don't want to go to that trouble, you could use a brass fastener. That works too, except you just have it sticking out the back then. So buttons are kind of cute if you can get them to work and if you have the right buttons. So she shows you on the sheet how to thread the buttons through. I, again, did not use wire. I just used a little bit heavier string. You could use yarn if you were able to put it on a needle maybe and poke it through. Give you a couple different templates that you can cut out. And then, of course, like I mentioned in the directions, the woman making them is making horses. She was not making flying horses. So if you print out any of the Pegasus pictures, you should be able to cut out the wings from that and put it on. I just left my wings white, thinking, to me, wings seem white, but maybe you want to paint them some beautiful colors or rainbow colors or something like that. So you can do whatever you want. And then she used lace to make her horse's hair. I just used black yarn and cut pieces the length I wanted them for the tail and tied them in a little knot and glued them on. And then I cut a bunch of shorter pieces and put them on for the mane. So you can do a lot of different variations and make it your own, but you do have a flying Pegasus horse then, and it is a horse on both sides. I did not do the double-sided wings, but you could, certainly easy enough, and that would work. So, a bunch of different kings that maybe thought a little bit too highly of themselves eventually, but Pegasus knew what was right and knew that she did not belong in, her job was not trying to get Bellerophon into Olympus. And then Zeus invited her to come because she was such a special horse. So, stay tuned next week for more Greek myth mania, and we will explore some other Greek myths. Since we've covered a lot of the gods, we will keep going with more good stuff. But if you want to check out your own Greek myth books or books about anything at all, come on in to Shaler North Hills Public Library. We are open 6 days a week. Just check the website for hours. But we are more than happy to still do park and pickups and pull together books for you if you tell us what kind you're looking for. So either way, we are here to serve you. And please come in and visit and watch our stuff online and let us know if there's anything you need. So this has been Miss Kathy from Shaler North Hills Library. Have a great time until we see you again, and thanks for watching. Bye.